Welcome to Season 2 of Digging Deeper Ag Chats with Al, the podcast that brings you timely and practical stories straight from the paddock. From sowing to shearing, fire to flood, and everything in between. We're here when it matters most. Each episode taps into real experiences, expert voices, and grounded advice that helps you stay ahead on farm. I'm Alistair from the Gippsland Ag Group, a grassroots farmer-led network in Gippsland, focusing on soil, grain and fodder, pasture and livestock. We're here to support producers in building resilient and profitable enterprises across our region. So let's dig in. Welcome everyone to Digging Deeper. We have another Al in the studio today. Alison Gunn, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Al.
Now, you're actually the owner of Herd Solutions, which you very kindly allow Chelsea to come out once a month and talk to us. So thank you very much for a start.
That's all good. It's been great for business.
Well, that's good to hear. It's been great just for farmers to be able to hear a bit more about what Chelsea has to say, and it's very topical and relevant. So really appreciate her coming in and appreciate you making that happen. So thank you.
No worries.
Now, a lot of people in this area will know you. You've been here for a while now. How long have you been in the Gippsland area for?
This time, 10 years, but I was here previously in the 90s and then moved back.
All right. Well, we'll go right back because you're actually from the UK originally.
Yep.
Tell us about growing up in, I assume, in England?
Correct, yep.
Yep. So tell us about early Alison Gunn.
Okay, so I grew up in a horticultural family, but we also always wanted to be a vet since I was 4. So from a very young age, went to help with a neighbour lambing sheep. And was determined that I was going to become a vet. And it was the days when there weren't many women vets. So it was a bit like everyone told me, you can't be a vet, you're not smart enough, you're a female, you can't do farm animal stuff. I'm a bit determined, so...
Right. So who's in your family?
I'm a dad and 2 brothers.
2 brothers. And where do you come in the line?
I'm the oldest.
Oh, the eldest?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Oh, you always had them nipping at your heels then, I guess.
Yeah, something like that, yes.
What part of England did
Canterbury and Kent, which is the Garden of England.
Right.
So grew up in a farming area with lots of orchards around and, as I said, a few sheep, not many cattle.
Yeah. And so you spent a lot of time at neighbours' property early days?
Yep. And I used to pretty well run their lambing by the time I was 16. It was very intensive. It's England, so 400 sheep was a lot of sheep. Yep. And we brought them all into pens and then lambed them each down, and each sheep got its pen with its 2 or 3 lambs and was left there for a day or 2 till they were all sucking, and then out it went to the paddock, and I was in charge of that sort of maternity area.
Now I've got some questions that will just sidetrack a little bit. Lambing in sheds into that intensive lambing systems, is that a good thing for the sheep over decades, or does that produce animals that can't lamb themselves anymore?
I don't know, Well. I would have thought it's no different. I mean, most of the time they're not assisted. I think we did assist them possibly more than we should have done. It's more making sure that it's particularly lots of them had triplets and twins, that whole thing about not losing the triplet and twins. They mothered up to all of them before they went out in the paddock. Mm-hmm. And that was really why it was sort of brought in so we could observe them, and they were easy to catch if they did need assisting. Not everybody probably assisted them as much as we did. Like when I went to vet school, it seemed that we did probably intervene more than we did, probably because I like doing it, I was like, oh yeah, let's get that one out, But I think it was just more getting that mothering ability and making sure they all had we hardly lost a lamb. Yeah.
So what sort of marking rates are you talking about over there? Do you have numbers from way back then?
It's a long time ago, but with lots of twins and triplets, so our marking rates would have been well over 160%, I'd say.
Mm. Now, I've often wondered about, because I watch a lot of YouTube channels and all lambing down in shed, I wonder how you could scale it for an Australian property over here on a larger scale. But
yeah, and I think that the things you run into also there are some of the disease risks, the more intensive, you got lambs, sheep in and out of those sheds. They're only in there for a couple of days, but it's probably like an intensive calving area too. By the end of the time, if you're not really good with your hygiene, then you probably is a bit of a disease risk to those last born lambs.
And when do you typically lamb over there? Is everyone lambing at a similar time, or do you have split lambings?
It's a long time since I was there, Al. But we lambed at Easter, so it was my Easter holiday job.
Yep.
So April, spring lambing.
Spring lambing, yep. Right. And so then they go out and finish on grasses.
Yep.
I'm assuming.
Yep.
So from working in those lambing sheds or your next door neighbour's lambing shed to becoming a vet, what was the journey like? I'm assuming traditional high school, then off to university or something?
Yeah, I had a year when I came out here. So, as I said, I always wanted to be a vet. Lots of people said I couldn't, and I had to work pretty hard for it. And in England at that time, once you started vet school, there was no time out. It was like you did the full 5 years or you got kicked out the course and didn't get back in. So I think I had to work fairly hard to get into vet school. So, and it was quite common to take a gap year. So I wanted to go around Europe, but Mum and Dad decided that wasn't very safe. But my uncle, who was sort of my mentor or whatever, was a vet and he was out here. So I basically got, if you get into vet school, we'll give you a one-way ticket. You've got to figure out how you're getting home. So I came out here and spent 6 months out here.
Yeah.
And spent a bit of time with my uncle, but I also travelled quite a lot around Australia. I rouseabout in Hughenden, did all sorts of things before I went back to the UK. And then I did 5 years at vet school in the UK.
Right. And then did you work in England straight out, or did you start travelling again?
No, I spent 2 years working in England, sort of got my foundation, so I was pretty confident. Again, I had a bit of a battle to get into a dairy practice, which I wanted to do. I sort of at that point was pretty comfortable with sheep, but figured that cattle was animals I knew less about, and I wanted to do them when I graduated. I had this burning ambition to be a farm animal vet, so off I went into dairy practice, and there's a few people that didn't want females, and that was the vets, not the farmers, but got myself quite a good job, got myself quite comfortable with what I was doing, and then came out here on a working holiday.
And where did you end up in Australia? Was it Victoria or somewhere else?
Initially, my first sort of real job was at Barraba, which is a beef area north of Tamworth, with a lot of studs. But my ambition was actually something else I always enjoyed doing was teaching. I'd always wanted a university job. So MAFRA at that point was one of the few places in Australia where you could get a residency and do a master's. So I've been graduated about 5 years and ended up at MAFRA under Jacob Malmo, which is sort of my big goal of actually teaching in university and being a cow vet.
Yeah, so that was working while doing your masters. Were you teaching at the same time, or was that after?
Correct. No, so it was a third job. That most of my university jobs have been those. So you're basically teaching, you're researching, and you're doing clinical work.
Right, and so you're still working with universities to this day? Yeah,
I still do a little bit of work for the University of Sydney. I do some marking for them and have input into some of their courses.
Yeah, something I didn't know about you, Al. So.
Here you go.
Now, I've got a question here. What's your philosophy behind Herd Solutions?
I guess we are there to prevent disease. I'd love to put myself out of business as a clinical vet. So my philosophy is to be cost effective, but to walk onto a farm and to work out how to prevent the ongoing problem. I'd love to see no disease anywhere.
Yeah. Now, has that changed growing up through your veterinary career? Has that sort of formed from a very early age, or is it something you've developed over time?
Probably I've always had a bit of that philosophy, but definitely it's developed more over time. You know, now being involved in the family farm, but well before that, like my masters I did at MAFRA, a lot of that was preventive health.
Yeah.
So preventive health has definitely been something I've been interested in, but definitely much more strongly now.
Yeah, and when you got out of university, we were talking before, and you went out to a job and you're concerned about the individual animal and making sure that animal is healthy and well.
Mm-hmm.
How has that changed over your time as well?
Oh, absolutely still concerned about the individual animal, and the welfare is a really important thing. But I think also having that realistic approach that we're not talking about a dog or a cat and a farmer's only going to be able to spend so much money on it to get it right. But I think also then relating that individual animal problem back to the big picture so that we can say, well, we're going to make this individual animal better if we can, but also we're going to try and prevent everyone else being in that situation.
Yeah, and so then you'll be working with the farmers, the husbands and wives, in actually setting up plans, I guess, to prevent that recurring in future, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's what, like, vets that have been in the large animal field for a while, what they really enjoy is working with the farmers.
Yeah.
It's the people that get you out of bed almost more than the animals. Yes, we like working with the animals. Cows and sheep, particularly cows, are amazing to work with because they're so stoic and you can do all sorts of things and they don't die. Sheep tend to die a little bit more readily.
Yeah. What breed's the worst contributor to that, Alison?
Or sheep or cattle?
Sheep.
Oh, probably merinos, for sure.
If you had said anything else, I would have kicked you out of the studio.
Yeah, and if it's cattle, it's probably jerseys.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they have a bit of a streak about them too, don't they, the Jersey cow?
A bit stubborn?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always been told never to turn your back on a Jersey bull, so yeah.
Good advice.
You've worked all over the country now, so what's unique about Gippsland? Have you seen something that's unique about this area?
I think, and this is probably happens in other areas in Australia as well, but we know we've got a very variable climate, and so I think a lot of our farmers are fairly adaptable, and there's all sorts of different ways that people farm, whereas in other areas with maybe a more reliable climate, there's less diversity, or maybe it's just in the dairy industry where I've done a bit of work as well, there's probably a bit less diversity. But, I think having moved around Australia a fair bit, every farmer's got its own uniqueness, but it's not the cattle, or the sheep, it's generally the climate and the plants and the forages you're dealing with and that sort of thing.
On a daily basis, you would see a wide range of call-outs, wouldn't you?
And also farmers we're working with, and I run quite a number of better beef groups, and even, the diversity of ways people make money, run their farm completely profitably with different philosophies. So one of the things in my groups I'm quite strong on, you might not agree with how someone else is farming, but you can always learn from someone else, even if one of them's a regen farmer and one of them's, all they're worried about is profit, they can still often have the similar philosophy, say, on genetics or breeding or whatever. So no matter what your farming philosophy is, you can always learn from someone else.
Now, you and Frank, you run a beef operation, is that correct?
Correct, yep.
So when you go out to a client's property that differs significantly from you, in the back of your mind, are you very conscious of that, or is it just something that you don't actually consider?
No, I don't really. We don't probably think about that one that much. As I said, there's so much diversity out there. I think it's great, working with different farms has been a massive learning opportunity for me. I've learned all sorts of ways of doing things I would have never thought of. And one of the things when we moved back to the family farm 10 years ago, I knew a lot about animals and I knew a lot about vet, but I really think that I had so much to learn about farming. And I've, running the beef groups, getting onto farms has really allowed me to learn and look at different ways of doing things, and I really love that.
Can you recall a story where you went out to a property and there was a light bulb moment from learning off one of those producers?
Oh, I don't know, a light bulb moment, but just seeing how people manage their part. I think for me, what I didn't know much about was soils and pastures, and so just the different ways people manage their crops, grow crops. A lot of the stuff, say for instance, Trevor Caithness does when he's with his, overflying his crops with a new seed that he's planted before he's harvested the seed, for instance, that sort of thing. It's just like, wow, this is so smart.
And you've actually signed up for the Gippsland Soil School.
Yep.
Is that what it's called, the Gippsland Soil School?
I think it is, yep.
I should know this because Gippsland Hag run it.
Exactly.
So it's great to see you furthering your knowledge in that space as well, and then I'm assuming you can contribute to producers when you go out there as well with that extra knowledge. So
that's the hope.
Yeah. Now, not only Chelsea works for you, but you got Bella, is that correct?
Correct, yep.
Yeah. Is there any other staff you've got?
Oh, I'm the queen of diverse, having staff all over the country.
Right.
So I've actually got, my first employer was a lady called Kathy who works in Melbourne, and she does a lot of our billing and does a lot of record writing for me.
Yep.
She actually works for a couple of other vets, and that's how I came across her. And then I've got Bella, and then I've also got a lady called Mandy who's up on the north coast of New South Wales. She's been with me for about 6 months, and she's doing a lot of the accounts. And finally, I've just put on a new lady called Kat or Catherine, and she's going to be taking over a bit more of the practice management side.
Right. I'm actually seeing a bit of gender equality here, Alison. There's no guys on the team, so
that's deliberate or not.
You used to have a guy, actually, Charlie.
Charlie, yeah. Yeah, I used to have Charlie.
Yeah, so how do you manage and keep a high-performing team going and spread across the country, obviously, as well? So how do you manage all that?
Well, let's think about Chelsea first. So for Chelsea, I think, as I said, as vets, we really like working with people, and one of the complaints I often hear from other vets with junior employees is they never get see the good clients. So right from the beginning, Chelsea was obviously very competent. She'd been out 5 years, so I was like, introduced her to all my clients. I'm not fussy about my client base. You do an amazing job, so you can go out and service them, which allows her to develop those relationships as well. I think I'm also with Chelsea, I'm quite keen that she came on the Livestock Consulting Internship Program, which allowed her to develop a lot of consulting skills. And I'm like, this week she's off to another conference about, I think, actually not sure, it's a whole series of day workshops on consulting and sort of big picture farm management run by someone associated with McKinnon.
Mm-hmm.
So she's doing that this week. So really trying to encourage her development, I think, and giving her that responsibility to grow the business, which she's certainly done in the MAFRA end, and to grow the client base and to work with some really great clients.
So generally, would, say, a producer have you as their vet and then another producer, Chelsea? Like, do you have your own client list, or do you cross across?
Tend to cross across, and we certainly have probably more geographically some clients that one or the other of us will go to, but no, we tend to cross across, and it sort of seems to work out that Chelsea probably does a bit more of the clinical work, and I do quite a lot more of the business management, and then picking up on some of the consulting work. But Chelsea's certainly developing in that area as well. So
now, you just touched on very briefly VLVS, that's Victorian Livestock Veterinary Scholarship, is that correct?
Yep.
Talk us a little bit about what that actually is and your part in it.
So one of the big problems we have in Australia, not just in Victoria, is getting vets from new graduates into practice. There's a whole heap of reasons for that. A lot of it is that a lot of the vets going into vet schools now are city people, so they're not from the country. But part of it is also that they're coming out with massive HECS debts, and that makes it harder, or they need to earn quite a lot of money. There's more money in small animal practice. And a lot of it is also a confidence thing. So if you go into practice and you've in a small animal practice and you have a sick dog come in, you're not sure what it is, it's very easy to admit it for the day and ask somebody to have a look at it. But when you're on a farm, you have to sort of tell the farmer, look, I really don't know what's wrong with this cow, I need to ring the boss. And some people just don't like doing that. They don't like to lose face. So what it is actually a program where it puts a vet in the car with them for a day a week for the first 6 months and then a day a fortnight. And it also gives them some education, some extra skills, like working on their preg testing, the kind of things they need to know to get out into practice. So this is specifically for vets going into regional areas. They have to do 50% large animal, farm animal, and they had to apply for it. So there was 8 positions across up Victoria. It is farmer funded because it's through the Livestock Biosecurity Fund, so it's levy funded. And the whole idea is to try and train more vets that will stay and remain within Victorian livestock veterinary industry.
Yeah, and you're saying that's outside of metro? It has to be into rural areas?
Yeah, outside of metro. Yep. And so the Livestock Biosecurity grants are a series of grants that are put up each year which different people can apply for. And we were actually approached, or the idea was run by Jenny O'Sullivan, isn't it?
I'm not sure, sorry, yeah. I'm not a vet.
I'm going to get it wrong. She's not a vet either, she's a farmer.
Right.
Yes, so Jenny O'Sullivan. So the idea was, I was talking to Jenny O'Sullivan about LCI, and she was saying we need to do something like that for vets. And then she met my colleague Becky Dickinson, who runs a thing called Veterinary Support Services, which is based in Warragul. And Becky goes out on farm with other vets. She's employed to actually go out and support young vets. And so then Becky and myself, well, Becky mainly, but I have supported Becky with another colleague as well to put in for a grant through Livestock Biosecurity Fund. It's a 4-year grant. It's over $1 million, and it's basically to support these 8 graduates into their first 2 years in practice, provide them with lots of support, and then if they stay another 2 years, they will get HECS reimbursement. Right,
so the benefit for them is not only the initial support, but also a financial benefit. Now, that person that spends time in the car, is that from their own practice, or is it from outside their practice that goes with them?
They had a choice. Most practices wanted it to be from their own practice, but we've got one practice that has an external supervisor, which is what Becky is when she's working.
Mm-hmm.
And that practice actually said recently that that's working really, really well from them because they don't have to worry about training that vet. They can get on and do all their jobs, but their vet is being trained. And I think if we run it again, we'd probably try and encourage more practices to do the same thing. Yeah. I personally thought I wouldn't want someone else to train my vet, but having seen how well it's worked in that one practice, I'd be quite happy to have someone else come in and do it if I had a young graduate. Yep.
So have you been a mentor? Are you a mentor in that space yet?
Not in that program. I'm helping manage the program. So We're basically, there's three of us sort of divided and conquered a bit. So I'm basically liaising with the supervisors, and then Becky's liaising with the students, and then Gemma Chuck, who's current AVA president, who's the third person in the team, she's liaising with the businesses, and then we've all got other roles within it as well. So it's a big project. It keeps us fairly busy.
And did you have many applicants?
Yeah, we had well over 20 applicants, and they were all amazing.
Yeah.
So it was a really hard job to actually decide which ones got it. But
And what were some key things you were looking for in that process? Because it wouldn't have been just the brightest vet students that came out, I'm assuming.
No, it was ones that we thought were great at teamwork. Some of them were already working in practice, some weren't. Had really good reasons as to why they thought they'd be livestock vets going into the future. Some of them obviously had really good skills, but maybe came from the city and so needed a little bit of support. Others were actually from farms, but they had to do it was a Zoom interview and then a face-to-face interview. It was a really hard decision. But we were looking for people that gave us really good reasons why they would still be in practice in 4 years' time, what they would get out of the project, why they wanted to do it, and they had to have those jobs that were at least 50% farm animal.
And do you think this is something that's going to be refunded
Hopefully.
in the future?
Hopefully.
Yep. And so when would the next round of funding or next round of grads be available? Just think of any future vets that might be listening to the thing. They can start to think about this.
Yep. So we're a year into this project and getting great feedback. We've just done a round of evaluation, and so the next project will hopefully start at the beginning of 2027.
Right, so graduates of 2027?
Yeah, or 26 or even 25. Like of the current cohorts, some are out 1 or 2 years, and that balance has been great for the cohort. They just that little bit of experience, and they're sort of sharing what they're doing. And it's also provided a great network between the team. They all know each other, and if one gets stuck on something, we've got a WhatsApp channel, hey, I've done this, look what I've done, or what do you think about this? How would you approach this? Where do you get this from? So that whole, we've managed to build this really tight, cohesive group of newly graduated vets as well.
Yeah, it sounds like a really positive thing, which is really good. Now we're going to move on just a little bit. Quick fire. Most underrated tool or overrated treatment?
Underrated tool, I reckon, is condition scoring. I think more farmers need to do it and do it well because it is so important for managing. And I think everybody knows in their head how to condition score, but I think actually it seems every time I run a condition scoring workshop, everyone sort of really seems to get a lot out of it.
So what's some key takeaways when condition scoring, and beef versus sheep, I guess?
Oh, beef, it's easier to do in the paddock, whereas sheep, you definitely got to run them through.
Yeah, hands on sheep always.
Hands on sheep always. Yep. Calibrate yourself, I guess. Know where to condition score. I think that's where a lot of people don't actually know it, and there's lots of good resources out there. But know the key areas you need to look at to condition score. I think is really important, and I think also for beef, there's fat scoring and condition scoring, and they're different.
Right. Can you explain that slightly for a non-beef person?
So fat scoring is basically what they do in the yards when they're selling carcasses for evaluation. And so you'll see, if you look at your feedback from the yards, the market report will have a fat score. Condition score is what we use in the paddock, and then you just look at slightly different areas basically to evaluate.
Fat cover or amount versus actual muscle is often in condition scoring, isn't it?
Well, it's muscle and it is fat as well, but it's not just how well the animal's finished, I guess.
What about the second part of that was most overrated treatment?
There's probably two.
Yep.
One would be drenching all your cows for worms, because there's no need to drench adult. I'm talking over, certainly first calvers, yes, at calving or prior to calving, but after that, second calvers generally need it, but certainly older than that. Cattle get really good immunity to worms. For beef cattle, there's little indication that they need drenching, particularly as a blanket. The odd one might need drenching if it's poor and skinny, occasionally if it's a really tough season and they're doing it really tough, but as a general rule, you don't need to drench your adult cattle.
Yeah, but possibly a fluke drench?
But possibly a fluke drench, yes. If you're in a fluky area, definitely. The other part of that is that if you're sending animals into the abattoir, it comes back with fluke and you don't think you've got fluke, always test for it, because if it says fluke on the abattoir score, all they've seen is some scarring on the liver. It doesn't mean to say there's fluke on your property.
Right.
So don't just take fluke off your abattoir feedback sheet.
So don't grab the drench gun if they say fluke. Just is it similar to wet counts in sheep? How do you fluke test?
It's actually easier than wet counts in sheep because you just need 10 poos from the paddock. You can just go down the paddock. They can be a week old. The test that's most reliable is actually an antigen test, so that doesn't matter. You don't have to get the eggs and just about to hatch. So 10 poos, ring your vet, basically, and send it away.
Very easy. And you said there was two?
The other one would be multi-mineral drenches used as a panacea. Like there's places for those multi-mineral drenches, but I think it's much more important to know what deficiencies you have on your farm, and often, particularly with selenium, a longer acting treatment. Did I say multi-mineral drench? I meant multi-mineral injection.
Yep, injection, yep.
Yep. Often a longer acting treatment might be more efficacious. So probably the message are really understanding what your mineral deficiencies are and what you need. And a lot of those short-acting drenches are really good as an immune stimulant, but they may not correct a deficiency.
So you're saying if you do suspect there's a mineral deficiency, figure out why and treat that cause rather than just pricking them with a needle.
More figure out what, and bear in mind that there's an awful lot of selenium deficiency around, and there's certain areas that are very copper deficiency. So know your farm and know what deficiencies you have on your farm and have a plan to actually address those the most cost-effective way. Yep.
Now, just off the top, there's a bit of a popularity of selenium chips being spread out in paddocks. Have you heard this, and have you seen any anecdotal evidence that's working, or is it something that is too early to tell us yet?
No, they've been around for years, Al. And when I worked in New Zealand, a little diverse that I did at one point that most people don't know about either. When I worked in New Zealand, we used them extensively and they work really well. And I have used them in other places. The trick with them is that the cows have to graze them for at least a third of the year. So it's got to be cost effective to do that. And on quite a lot of more intensive places it is, particularly if you've got pivots and that sort of thing where you've got areas of the farm where the cattle are grazing quite a lot.
Yeah.
And then it does definitely work out cost effective. Whereas if you've got a very extensive farm, then generally the injections or even the boluses work out a lot better. The other thing about the chips is there's some new evidence, like we all said that plants don't need selenium, but I think it's more the plants don't die without selenium, but in fact they do benefit. And there is some research out there showing that plants are more drought resistant if they've got selenium. So I think part of the reason that is happening is also that research is out there. And I know there's some people in my beef groups are trying to actually see what it does, think it's a good thing for their farm from a plant perspective as well as from a cow perspective.
Yep, and it probably goes even further down into the soil. We'll be learning in a couple of years' time.
Yeah.
So,
but I think the only thing I would say is with that, it does vary. The outcome does vary with your soil type and when and how you apply it. So if you're going to use a selenium chip, then think about doing a blood test after a year and see if it's actually working for you.
Well, you actually had a nice little segue in there because you said plants do better in the drought times with selenium chips, and that's actually part 2 of why you're on here, is to talk about suboptimal seasons and what we can do, because you do a lot of feed budgeting and obviously look at a lot of animal health through these dry times. And it's rather ironic because we're sitting in this warm studio with it raining outside, was predicted of about 25 more mils. Which is really nice, and hopefully the whole state is getting it, and places that are rain deficient. But in one line, what does a suboptimal season look like in Gippsland?
I think it's the amount of feed you've got ahead. Like, we all know that to get a really good spring, we need rain in August and September. And we also know that in East Gippsland, that's probably our lowest rainfall months. So I think here in East Gippsland, we're quite used to not having a good spring. And a lot of people do rely on summer crops and summer type grass is and that sort of thing. But I think this year is particularly concerning because of the lack of forage across the state. So this is when people are building up to make sure they've got enough forage reserves if you use forage to go into the winter. And probably people right now are looking around going, I might not make as much silage or hay as I really wanted to.
And that forage reserve for a very big distance has been depleted, hasn't it? It's not just in our little area, it's right up into New South Wales and further, isn't it? So
it has, although we were actually driving around the state doing some of our VLVS visits last month, and there is a lot of grass over in the Western District and not many stock, but that doesn't mean to say that's necessarily going to turn into an abundance of hay, but certainly looking over there, it's looking a lot more positive, I think, than it has previously.
So if you were to define what a forage reserve is on farm, what would that look like for beef versus sheep?
Well, I think for sheep, they're pretty easy. We just need some barley and we know that they don't need much forage. So I think if you are planning ahead for sheep, we don't necessarily need to think about forage in the same detail as we do with cattle. I think one of the key things with sheep, though, is if you're going to be feeding them silage, it needs to be short chopped to be utilised well, not great big long stalky stuff.
Would you ever recommend silage over grain, though, for sheep?
Seldom.
Yeah.
Seldom. It's really only if you can make it on farm and it's cheaper. I guess that's where you might look at it as a maintenance type thing more than but normally grain is so much easier and everything else, so yeah.
Yep. But that's different for cattle, is it?
Absolutely. Cattle need forage, and I think this is where everyone comes on start. You can always buy grain, and grain doesn't really tend to change that much in price, even in a drought, because it comes from lots of different places, whereas forage obviously costs lots more to transport. So once the local area is out of forage, it tends to get really expensive. So I think there's two things about forage for cattle. One is knowing what class of stock you plan to feed it to, because if you want to feed forage to young stock, you need a much better grade of silage, and so you need to be thinking of cutting it earlier and having a shorter, lower fibre forage, whereas if you're feeding it to cows, they can digest the fibre a lot better.
Yeah. Now, off the top of your head, do you know some numbers for us with protein, energy and...
Yeah.
Fibre?
So if I'm looking for a forage, well, it depends what you're mixing it with, and certainly if people are using the grain-free pellets, they're quite high in fibre too, so that sort of limits it. But if you're looking for young stock, you probably want an NDF like lower than 50 if you can get it, or whereas you certainly don't want it 65, 70, whereas your cows you can. So NDF is the fibre level, for people who don't know, so it means neutral detergent fibre. And so you really want to have that sort of 45, 50. Sometimes you can get forages less than that, but it's very easy to get a long stalky forage goes up to 65, and then young stock really can't eat enough of it to actually live on, particularly if the energy is not good. For your energy, for silage, so the way it works is to make silage, it respires. That means it loses its energy. So silage is on the ground for longer. Silage is on the ground for less time, and so you don't lose as much energy, which means it generally loses about a megajoule. So if you have a really high-quality ryegrass or really high-quality grass, you might have 11 megajoules, and so a good quality silage should have about 10, whereas if you leave it down for hay, it's going to lose a lot more energy, so it might be a good hay might be a 9, often a 7, 6. And the biggest thing I think about forages is it's so variable. It's really important to feed test it and know. So you can plan. So number one is plan. I need some really good quality forage for my young stock. These are the paddocks I'm going to cut. Then I might need some less good forage for feeding my cows over winter or whatever, and I can let it grow a bit longer and stalky, make a bit more. Having that plan. But then the next part, particularly again for feeding those young stock, or when it's a performance animal, is to actually do that feed test, whether you're purchasing or whether you're making a big batch, so you actually know that what you tried to make is actually what you did make. And there's some really good feedback from places like Australian Forage Lab on if you get the right test done, you can actually see how good your silage is, and then you can actually say, well, actually that's not as good as I thought it is. What do I do to make it better next time? So I think there's a whole learning experience there too about doing a feed test and actually going, yep, I actually nailed that one. That's not really what I wanted. Yeah.
Now you mentioned NDF and ME. What about protein? Is protein significant for, it's not obviously so significant for older cows, but young cows?
Now, protein is significant for lactating cows. You still want that up sort of 12 plus, and definitely for young cows or young cattle, growing animals need protein. So again, generally, if you're cutting a lush, good quality pasture, protein's not limiting.
Yep.
Sometimes when you ensile it, you can actually overcook that protein and you get too much soluble protein. That's another slightly more complex topic. But if it's a good quality grass, but if you're cutting once it's going to seed, then the protein level drops and you can get some pretty low protein. So again, it's that less good quality, bigger bulk, often lower protein. Fine for a dry cow, they can live on 6 or 7% protein, no worries at all, but not for
What do you need
stock.
for a young growing animal?
Yep, you want sort of 14, 15, probably can get away with 12, but you certainly don't want it down in the below 10.
Now, can you get your protein too high when they start working against themselves?
You can, but I think people, in my view, people worry about that too much often. Certainly not with forages. I think it's more with the forages, it's when you've got too much soluble protein, which is an ensilement problem. So protein can get too high, and it does take a bit of energy to burn the protein. But I think most of the time I see it's going the other way.
Too low.
Yeah.
Now, if we're looking at a back of envelope plan, you just talked a lot about knowing what class of stock, having our feed test available. What else are you looking at if we're going to be looking to carry our animals through, say, till next November, through the autumn and winter? What other factors do we have to consider in that?
Yeah, so I think it's, if we're saying, right, hopefully it's not, and it's now raining, so hopefully it's not the beginning of a drought. But say this is the beginning of a drought or a dry season and it doesn't rain again for another 6 months, it's having those decision points and saying, right, well, if it gets really tight, who am I going to keep, who am I going to sell? Booking in some preg testing and getting your preg testing done early, knowing who your empties are, maybe looking at early weaning those, even if you don't early wean everything. At some point having that early weaning decision, I think, are all important things. Also having some sort of a feed budget. So we've talked about quality of silage, but also how much silage or hay, what do you think your grass might grow. Like even in a drought, it does a little bit of growth generally. But that's another thing that should be in your plan. And then definitely containment areas. And probably not just containment areas, but also if it's getting really dry, which are your good paddocks you want to preserve and maybe not grazing those, and which are the ones you might want to renovate down the, and you don't really care if you smash them down a bit. So
open the gates on them.
Yeah, that might not be a containment area per se, but it's like going, right, we just spent a heap of money renovating these paddocks here, and if we don't graze them too short, if it rains, they're going to go. And they should respond the best. Whereas these paddocks here, look, really don't care if we smash a couple of these down, happy to throw a crop in it next year, and they've got water and shade and everything else we need.
Yep. Now, do you notice a few mistakes that get made regularly on when we're doing these numbers and calculations? Is it an emotional thing that is what causes mistake? Is it not actually knowing exactly what forage we have on hand, or what's some of the mistakes we can be looking for?
I think decision paralysis. I know it's a mistake, but having a model and a process for making a decision and sticking to it. I think the people that go through the droughts really well have made their decision. Yeah, they might have sold too early, but they didn't know that. They've made a decision. They've gone with it. It's worked. You can always buy stock back in or make a bit more silage or whatever, okay? But having that decision-making process is one thing. I think not understanding the quality of the feed and what their stock want, which was sort of covered, is something else. And then under or overestimating grass or really understanding your paddocks and what your different plant species are and which ones are likely to respond in the summer, but what the actual amount of grass growth is going to be. Yeah. So not even in the summer, like let's just redo that bit. So understanding your paddocks and knowing what type of species are there and when they're likely to respond to rainfall at different times and what that grass response might be in kilograms of dry matter. And I think a lot of farmers don't really understand that, but there's a lot of information out there on like the Evergraze site, etc. So knowing what's going to respond when.
Yeah, that's a really good point you made, because I was just speaking to you before this podcast saying that we're under a major renovation program at our farm, so I got lots of annuals in, and when it went dry very quickly for us, and we didn't have much of a perennial base on the farm. Now that it has rained 2 inches in the last sort of fortnight, everything's away again, and so we're looking pretty bad there for a while, but because we had the annuals in and it did rain. However, if it stayed dry, we wouldn't have had much at all over summer, so we would have been in a world of hurt. But yeah, thankfully it did rain for us in this sense. But yeah, it's very important that we do know what's going to grow if we do get breaks at different times of the year, and what won't grow as well.
And you can always go and buy some lambs and trade them or something else if you need to. I mean, there's always, if you're happy to buy and sell, and obviously there's a whole heap of biosecurity risks, which is, could be a podcast in itself.
Yeah, big one.
But, that if you're happy to trade, then flexing with that feed budget. And I think those annual systems, they are so much more variable. So if you've got a lot of annuals in, you've definitely got to make those decisions much quicker.
Yep, it responds significant at this time of year with the warmth in the ground. So let's walk us through a 90-second feed budget. So key inputs, assumptions, and common traps.
Okay, so I think there's two parts to your feed budget. One is what your animals require, and the other is what your pasture's going to grow. I guess the easy bit is going out and counting if you have forage, what's there. If you've got grain, well, we might be able to buy grain. You can put that into the mix. The next easiest part probably is to work out what your animals are going to need. And if you're not sure on that, I think one of the best resources for any of these dry times is the AgVic Drought book. It's got anything you ever need. It's got every figure on what any animal requires in it.
That's available online,
online, and probably from the AgVic office as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we've actually got copies in this building too. So
yeah, and there's a sheep one, there's a cattle one, and it's got all those figures in it. But obviously there's plenty of consultants and other people that could help as well. But so step number 2 is to work out what animals you're going to keep, how much energy they're going to require. And energy is the most important thing. At that point, yes, we need protein for young stock, and yes, there's a whole heap of other things, but energy is going to be the limiting factor. And then the third thing is what's your pasture's going to do, and predicting your grass growth. And that's the hard bit. And so you've basically got to probably say, well, let's just assume it's going to be minimal. And there are figures out there on the Evergrade site about sort of worst case scenarios. So you could do a worst case scenario budget and a medium case scenario budget, and then throw in some either pasture cover or, so as in amount of bare area or as in kilograms of dry matter. And you probably need to say, right, put some decision points in there, like if I know I've only got 4 or 6 weeks worth of feed for everything, like you obviously probably just did, then I'm going to need to sell this many stock, because otherwise if we run out of stock, I think where the traps are the people that leave it, that don't make the decisions. They've got really skinny animals, they aren't worth so much, they're out of feed, they then have to buy expensive feed. Being really proactive, knowing, what your crops are likely to do, if you've got crops in, or what your grass is going to do, and putting those 3 pieces together, Excel spreadsheets as good as anything in my view.
Yep. And the risk appetite of the individual business is going to play a fair bit of part in that too, isn't it? So you don't have to match your next door neighbour if it's not something that you're wanting to risk.
Yeah, and I think early decisions and the people, farming that's one thing I have really learned over the last particularly 10 years. I think farming is such a game of timing. I'm probably known for not being the earliest person on the block. So I'm not sure how good I'd be if I was the only farmer in our family, right? Because the people that really seem to do a really good job are the ones that are really prepared, the ones that ring me up 3 months before marking and want their pain relief. You know those people? They're going to have their seed organised now for planting in April. Those people are the people, I think, the one thing I've learned is that if I was to go farming by myself, I would have to be much better at making fast decisions 3 months before I'd otherwise make them.
Well, it's interesting. You've touched on decision making a few times, and I remember one of our early podcasts, I said the worst decision is no decision. And I think that's pretty true. If you're making decisions, even if it's a wrong decision, it's better than not making any decision at all. So
And that's also been a learning from running my own business. It's just full of decisions all the time.
Yep. The people that do operate good can make them fast and make them well. So.
Yep.
You touched on early weaning or split weaning before.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so I think let's talk about preg testing first. So I think timing of preg testing, used to say just do it at weaning, and in a good season you can certainly do that because cows will abort. And if you don't need the dates, then doing it at weaning is a fairly practical thing. But if things are getting tight, actually preg testing early has two advantages.
What's early, for cattle?
Early for cattle would be 6 weeks after the bull has come out,
right.
6 to 8 weeks, because that then allows you, so that's what you could do with your heifers anyhow. In fact, you could even push it to 5. But at 5 weeks, sometimes they'll abort. Mm-hmm. So normally we say 6 with the ultrasound just because of that, okay? But then you can have them, if you want, you can age them too. So then if you want down the line to say, right, I only want to keep the heifers that conceived in the first 4 weeks, you could actually have that figure, give or take a week or so. And the same with the cows. If you did want to go and actually preg test them 6 to 8 weeks after the bull has come out, you could pull out the ones that are going to calve late and have them on your, if it stays dry, I'm going to cull these animals.
Yeah. Also,
then you've got your empties. So even if we're talking about split weaning, there's a few options in there. But one would be to say, right, well, the early calving ones, we're going to keep those. We'll keep the calves on those for a while, and we want to get rid of these cows, so we'll get rid of those. The only problem about doing it that way is those later calving animals are often also got the smallest calves. So the sort of split weaning conversation is also about, well, we've got the ones that calve first, they're now 4 months, they're 130 kilos or something like that, and let's wean them. That's weaning them a bit early. And the ones that calve later with the little calves, we'll leave them with their mums a bit longer because they won't have such a developed rumen. So with early weaning, the key is to try and develop the rumen. And so, and I think where I've seen people stuff it up is like we have this message out there, which is let's early wean because then the cow only needs half the amount of feed and the calf needs a little bit more, but you're going to have cut your feed requirements by a third. Okay, that works if you've got some good feed to put your calves on. Now, whether that's a crop, whether that's some irrigated pasture, whether that's just some good quality silage and some grain. But if you've only got really ordinary silage and you don't want to put a lot of money into grain, or you don't have the setup or the feeders or anything for that, and you haven't got anything else, and then I see early weaning being not so good because those little calves require higher protein. They want that 14, 15, 16, 17, probably 17%. And you also need to adapt their rumen. So in a dairy calf, what they do is they start feeding grain from a very young age because it's actually the grain, the volatile fatty acids, which is the energy product from the rumen of grain, that develops the rumen.
What about fibre for young calves?
Yeah. No.
No.
So there's always this, and I actually had this conversation with a farmer today, okay? There was this thing out there that fibre tickles a rumen and develops it. That theory was probably proved wrong about 20 years ago, okay? We do need fibre, for in the rumen, but the important thing to actually develop that rumen so that they can transition into being a full ruminant is actually the grain. So even if you're creep feeding, like we had a whole heap of people in the 17, 18, 19, whatever that drought was, we had a whole heap of people that had some pretty cool creep feeders set up, whether it was just a hot wire on a staff hicket with a, so you start off with having the, putting out the silage or the hay and trailing it out with the calves there. And I think that's another important thing with early weaning is not just to throw them in the yard with a heap of forage when they've not seen any forage.
Now, just one question. With sheep, it's super important to imprint feed well on the mothers.
Yep.
Is it the same for the cattle?
Not as important, and
No.
I was going to go to imprint feeding, so I'm glad you brought that up. So for those that don't know what imprint feeding is, it's when you actually are feeding the mothers for at least a week or two in the paddock before you wean them, and then whenever they're introduced to grain, they've seen their mum eat it, and so they'll eat it. And if you don't do that, lambs do not adapt to grain very well or any other forages. Same with cattle, it's not as critical, but if they've been fed it with before they're weaned and they see their mothers eat it, then they're much more likely to adapt more quickly, particularly when they're younger. If they're 5 months plus, probably doesn't matter. But when they're little and you're trying to early wean them young. And so what these people did, in the drought was that they'd trail out the silage and then they'd run the silage trail and the calves would go down the silage trail, and then at the end it went underneath the hot wire, and then the other side of the hot wire was the grain on top of the silage, and you get them eating that and then putting out some troughs with grain in, etc.
Yeah, basically the mums can't go past the hot wire because they're too big.
Yeah,
it's clever.
Yeah.
And easy.
And easy, yeah, that's right. I mean, you can get all sorts of, advantage feeders, and all those feeders have like little creep feeders on them, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. But the important thing, if you're going to early wean, wean down to 100 kilos. If you're going to wean less than 150, is you probably need to put some grain in the system, and you probably need to have them eating it for a couple of weeks before you wean them. So it's not like, oh my goodness me, we need to wean now. You've actually got to be, again, like everything in farming, you've got to plan it.
Set up and planning.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll move on. We talked a lot about your energy, protein, NDF. What about minerals that actually are going to help in tough times?
So I think one of the things, if you are feeding grain or pellets, they often have the minerals in it, and that can actually be a really good benefit. But I think in tough times, one of the ones that we hardly ever seem to need to use down here is your A, D, and E, and that's because vitamin A and vitamin E, particularly vitamin A, are found in...
Here comes the English background out. Vitamin, I've always said as a kid. So.
Oh, I'm going to say what I was done wrong. Okay, vitamin, whatever it is.
Keep going.
Okay,
yeah.
so the A is, particularly A, is in green grass. Okay, so if it gets to that sort of drought where you have no green feed and you're feeding straw and pellets or straw and grain for several, more than a month, you definitely need to be thinking about A, D, and E, because you will get vitamin A deficiencies. And I'm not changing it to vitamin now, sorry.
Okay.
And then the other one's obviously selenium at any point, because we know we're very selenium deficient, and when animals are under stress, they're more likely to get sick. And so selenium is really important in the immune system, plus you've often got these animals really close together, okay? Copper, if it's low, copper actually, because I think one of the other things we see when we've got animals all in containment feeding is pink eye, because they're all close together. So copper, if you're copper deficiency, then that might make them more likely to have pink eye. And the other one I would say in any sort of dryish autumn feed would be a calcium and salt lick, particularly for your older animals, and particularly if you've got autumn calvers, because a lot of our autumn pastures are very low in calcium and salt, and then it's basically you can have all sorts of issues with it. So I'm really growth. Calcium for your growth, crops as well. Calcium for your growth, salt can help with things like autumn calvers, etc. So I'm pretty keen on that sort of a lick as well. Yeah. And the other one, which isn't a vitamin, and I had on here that we needed to cover, is if you're feeding any sort of containment feeding, any sort of hot, crop feeding, anything like that, don't forget that your 5-in-1, your Clostridial diseases, that vaccine really only lasts for 3 months. So if you're going to be weaning early, you're better off actually trying to get the vaccine in before weaning, because I don't like vaccinating out weaning because they're under enough stress as it is. So if you've had your 2 shots, if you're weaning early, generally most people would have marked them and had their 2 shots of 5-in-1 should be fine for early weaning. But a bit later on, if they're going on to crops, or if you're weaning a bit later, and any sort of feeding, any sort of grain, any sort of what I'd call a hot feed, something that's going to get them growing, lush grass, whatever, I think really important to have at least one extra 5-in-1 booster.
Yeah, so we make it a rule of thumb that if they're ever going into containment, we're talking sheep now, they all get 5-in-1. Yep. Is that ever a bad idea? Or
No.
are you saying that you can't sort of overdo it?
No, and in fact, I think in Tassie they've even got an 8-in-1 now, but I think
really?
for here, probably the 5-in-1 is probably all we need.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
What's the 8th?
No, you put me on the spot. It's 3 different...
That's right, you can check with your mentor later in the car.
Yeah. Let's just do that one. Don't ask that question. Yeah. But, so the 5-in-1, absolutely, definitely put that one in there.
It's cheap insurance, we figure, because we've been inside that window, what we thought they were protected, put them in, and lambs are dropping dead with stuff that we didn't think they should be because of protected, whereas if you give them another injection straight in,
yep,
they seem to be quite well covered. So
yep. And have we talked about sheep enough for this early weaning stuff?
No, well, I was just going to actually...
Have you got some more sheep questions for me?
There was one more question. Feed, sell or crop, what are the decisions around the sheep when it goes dry? Is it much the same as cattle, or are you actually got some more options with lambs?
Well, I think lambs are easier to put into containment.
Yep.
And there's a whole heap of auto-feeder type lamb containment options out there that lotting lambs is definitely the flavour of the month, it seems. But I think it's having... Again, you've got to transition. Okay, so I think one thing we haven't talked about is crops or transition. So number one, I guess now, if you're looking at it now, you could think, well, I could put in a crop. You would still get out a summer crop, absolutely. But it needs to be a big enough crop that you're going to graze it for several months, not just for a couple of weeks, whether it's for a cow or whether it's for a lamb. So, have you got the paddocks? What's the options? I think you've got to do your budget on it. So, if you got a paddock ready for a crop and you like putting in crops, then that might be an option at this point. Although I reckon most people already would have planned that. If it's feed or whether it's sell, it's like, what's the feed going to cost? What are the growth rates you're going to get? Getting that transition right, whether it's a sheep or a cow, if you're young stock or whatever, if you're putting them onto some sort of feedlot type or containment area type feeding, the transition is so important, because if they get too much grain too quickly, then we know they're going to get acidosis, and that will set them back for ages. If they don't, you've got to give them 2 or 3 weeks really to adapt to that new ration, and you've got to introduce it slowly and not just, suddenly change the ration and expect them to start eating it and growing, I think. So having a situation where they're introduced maybe in the paddock to some of the feed you're going to feed in a containment area, or at least keep a consistent, and you said about forage for sheep, but I think if you had some forage you were going to feed in the containment area even, just for a couple of weeks as part of that induction process to introduce that to them in the paddock, then that stays consistent as they go into that containment area, and then you drop that out and etc.
Yeah. There's one other thing that I've heard you talk a lot about too, and if we are, say, planning to finish off, say, 100 lambs, we put in a paddock expecting that we can grow enough feed to finish those 100 lambs. If it doesn't eventuate that we can have enough feed in that paddock, putting them in for, say, 2 weeks and then pulling them back out is not a very good use of that paddock, because they're rumined by the time they're in there for 10 or 12 days is just starting to develop to that new feed.
Yeah.
And so what are some options? Say, do we put less numbers in there so that we can finish them off, or look at some other options around that?
Yeah, I guess, again, it depends on infrastructure and what you want to do, but one option would be to, if it's a forage crop, would be to put some grain in there and make it go further. I think the important thing, as you said, there's no point giving any ruminant feed for 2 weeks, because the efficiency is having the right bugs in the rumen to digest whatever it is they're eating, and that will change with every single forage. So that's why I was talking earlier about having some sort of option when you transition that gets taken into the containment area for a couple of weeks. But the same thing. So if you got a paddock that isn't doing as well, yes, number one is you could put less in and look at selling some. You could put a feeder in there or give them access to grass. But if they're lambs, you're trying to finish them, you want them trying to be getting that 300 grams a day. So probably you actually want to be looking for another feed, like a grain of some sort, or lupins, or a lupin maize mix, or there's a whole heap of options out there depending on what you can get. Looking at some sort of other feed that's going to allow them to grow fast, not just letting them have access to the paddock which hasn't got particularly good grass in it, because you're not going to get anything finished.
That's a good point, and probably a good one to finish it on. But you would have got my last question, did you, Alison?
Yes, I did.
I ask all our guests. Now, Chelsea has come up with one of the best ones, and her one was actually that echidnas live for up to 40 years. So
there you go.
My kids are really interested to learn that one. So what have you got for us, Al?
I can't follow that. So I spent last week at the international, what's it called, the World Sheep Vet Conference, basically. So there was sheep vets from all over the world. Sort of quite interesting in itself, because there's not many places where you have the scale of sheep you have here and in New Zealand. Couple of things I learned from that. So sorry, I was looking at a very still a very work-related one. But one of the speakers was from a corporate, or several of the speakers were from corporate companies talking about where sheep fitted into their enterprise. And one of them actually said that they've been doing some costing recently on, some new farms and what they were going to put in there. So their ROI on sheep was a little bit less than the ROI on cattle. I think the ROI on sheep was, big corporate was somewhere around that sort of 3 to 4%. Cattle was sort of 4%.
Yep, just for people that might not know, return on investment. Yep.
Sorry, yep. Dairy, I think, was 8%. But they were going to put a whole heap of land into trees. And the trees were similar to your cattle, or they're about sort of 4, 5, 6%. But with the carbon credits, 21% return on investment.
Oh, dear.
And I went, I'm quite passionate about, I grew up in a country where farming land was really valued as farming land. And in Australia, I actually don't think we do that. I see so much good farming land go under houses. Look what's happening in South Gippsland or whatever. The Warrigal, there's more and more areas of Warrigal getting subdivided. So we're putting really good farming land under houses, and now we're going to have this massive incentive to put a whole heap more farming land under trees. And I do often wonder how we're going to feed the world.
What a depressing note to finish on.
Sorry.
It is interesting, and it's something that we should look more into because, yes, it's happening up here in East Gippsland as well. We're starting to get outbid for properties because the tree companies are coming in, aren't we? So,
do you want a different one?
No, that's good. It's what you have learnt that has interested you.
I was just like, wow, that's such a big amount. That's really going to change the economics.
Yeah, and especially if those corporates are looking right into it, there's money in it, obviously.
There's obviously money in it, yeah.
Yeah, they don't do anything unless they're making money, so...
Yep. Okay, now you make me feel bad for having a depressing one.
No, it's the reality of what we face sometimes, and it's not all sunsets and nice days. It's this as well, but we really appreciate you coming in.
All good. That was a bit of fun.
Yeah, it's been really good, and we'll make sure to get you back in at another stage when you're not busy, which is probably going to be a very long time away.
No, it's all good. I'm always happy to talk. Al, you should know that.
No, I really appreciate it. So thanks, Alison.
No worries.
A big thank you for tuning in today. And remember, if you have a question about today's episode or a topic you'd like us to cover, reach out to one of our many platforms and join the conversation. We're here because of your passion and commitment to agriculture. Together, we can build a stronger farming future. This episode was brought to you by Herd Solutions, your local farm animal vets, servicing Mafra to Malakuta.
This podcast is made possible by the Future Drought Fund Regional Drought Resilience Planning Program, co-funded by the Victorian and Australian governments.